Welcome to the Bulwark podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. It is Wednesday, and there are just 13 days to go before the election. I keep wanting to write a diary so that I could read it a couple of years from now or a couple of months from now or whatever, just to go back and say, okay, how crazy was it? What did you think was happening? What do you think was going to happen? I mean, so today you wake up and, the day after picking a fight with Anthony Fauci, the president of the United States picks a fight with Leslie Stahl and storms out of a 60 Minutes interview, which now he's threatening to release it early, which who knows what he. Lawyers are saying they can't find the parents of more than 500 kids who were separated from their parents at the border by the administration. That story's back. Mitch McConnell, amazingly enough, is trying to kill a coronavirus relief deal. Even as the pandemic explodes across the country, there were more than 60,000 new cases just yesterday. And as I mentioned on the podcast yesterday with Benjamin Wittes, I can't get past the fact that yesterday Trump is demanding that his attorney general do exactly what he asked the president of the Ukraine to do, which is to open up an investigation into the Bidens. And just to put the cherry on the cake here, it turns out that Trump has a bank account in China. So here we are, less than 2 weeks before the campaign. There is a Supreme Court nomination that is pending. We are going to have the final debate tomorrow night. The first debate, as far as I know, where there is officially a mute button that will be used to tell the president of the United States to shut up during a debate. I'm all for this, by the way. President has kind of abandoned the whole law and order campaign, and now it's all about Hunter Biden all the time. Hunter Biden is bad, bad, bad. It does say something about the campaign that we're all in on the laptop. So, joining me to talk about this, Mark Salter, whose Twitter biography reads, "I used to be almost somebody." Hey, happy Wednesday, Mark.
Same to you, Charlie. Thanks for having me on.
I love that. I used to be almost somebody. I feel that way. I really identify. I'm bonding with you. The moment I saw that, I used to be almost somebody.
I exult in my obscurity.
Well, we all need to at a certain point, especially those of us who are never Trumpers. Mark, of course, is a longtime friend, confidant, speechwriter, and biographer of the late John McCain, and he has a new book out, The Luckiest Man: Life with John McCain. It came out last week. It's getting just fantastic reviews. Starred review in Kirkus. One of John McCain's key staffers turns in an affecting memoir. Salter gives a highly readable blow-by-blow account, one of the best fly-on-the-wall political memoirs in recent memory. Highly recommended. That's pretty good, Mark. And that's
very, very nice to read that. Yeah, thank you.
And then John Meacham. We all know John Meacham. Franklin Roosevelt had Lewis Howe and Harry Hopkins. JFK had Ted Sorensen and Arthur Schlesinger Jr. And John McCain had Mark Salter. In this compelling, honest, and much-needed book, Salter, McCain's longtime co-author and advisor, captures the raucous, resilient, and invigorating spirit of the late war hero and legendary senator. McCain wasn't always right, but he was always decent, and Salter's terrific account reminds us of what public service and public servants ought to be like. So that's good stuff. So congratulations on that, Mark.
Thanks very much.
All right, so we're going to get to McCain in just a moment, but let's do a little choose your own adventure for the moment. You've been in politics for what, like 80 years now?
Yeah, something like that.
I actually do feel
I've been
like
trying
that.
to escape for the last 30, but
So choose your own adventure here. What story? Let's fixate on one story that you're just fascinated in. Jeffrey Toobin doesn't count because we did that yesterday, so.
I'm really not that fascinated by it. You've piqued my curiosity about 60 Minutes. I'm over 65. It's one of our favorite shows, my cohort of senior citizens.
Yeah.
We'd love to see the president turn in a good performance on Sunday.
I am fascinated by this. That he walks out of an interview with Leslie Stahl, who I'm sure asked him some tough questions. But what was the question that flipped his trigger? I mean, we're going to find out, right?
Yeah, who knows? Tony Fauci, who apparently is his bête noire now, but Yeah, it's I've said weeks ago I'm no longer able to suspend my disbelief, but Trump is able to stun me anew almost every day. But I mean, you would think that he was trying really hard not to win re-election, but we'll see. Maybe there's some secret hidden genius here, but
Well, I was reading some of the people who always attribute the four-dimensional chess to Trump and saying, well, this is his way of standing up against the media elites. He doesn't lose anything by talking about how biased CBS is, and that's like, okay, right, we got it. But you've already got those people. I mean,
yeah.
it's like everything's a rally speech now. Okay, you've nailed down the base. We know that.
He's forever playing to his crowd. Whatever's right in front of him is who he plays to, and the memory of his cheering MAGA crowds, is ever present in his mind, I guess. But there aren't enough of them. I'm sure people who can count have been telling him, but he persists.
But this is not strategy. This is a snit. Here's the guy who's supposed to be, the strong man,
Right.
the orange duce, the man who, from the balcony, and he runs away from Leslie Stahl. I'm sure that's not the way the MAGA heads are going to see this, but
No.
it's like run away, and then he's in such a snit. He was supposed to come back for a chat with Mike Pence, a walk and talk or something that they do, and there's Pence sitting around holding his pencil, and it's like, no,
Getting the,
the
getting the
president
Chris
has gone
Christie treatment.
upstairs. The
All
president's
the,
gone upstairs to take a warm bath in Fox News or something. I don't know.
he,
So,
the only thing he hasn't given Pence yet so far is COVID, like he gave Christie. But that's
well, not that we know. So, yeah, I am fascinated by that. I'm also fascinated by the brilliant communications strategy here of bringing the maximum amount of attention to this show. Because I probably wouldn't on a Sunday night. I probably wouldn't have watched 60 Minutes, because it's like I really am desperately trying to grab for a life. But now you have to, right? You absolutely have to watch it.
it's must see TV now. It usually is for lots of senior citizens, and but I don't. Who knows? I mean, you would, like I said, you would think he was trying to lose it.
So the other story that fascinates me, and you've been in campaigns for a long time, and this is wonky and this is nerdy. I am totally fascinated by the story of how the Trump campaign blew $1 billion. I mean, this is just this is it is just so amazing to read the stories about how he is being absolutely pummeled on television by Joe Biden. Again, I've said this before, but nobody saw this coming. I mean, how do you piss away $1 billion?
Boy, I remarked somewhere else. I wish I'd gotten into the media consulting business instead of the speechwriting business, but I don't know. I mean, the funniest line in that story is the 1.5 million he blew on DC on the
Oh,
DC market. Biden may be kicking the shit out of him in every battleground state, but by God, he's competitive in DC. It's
no,
just
that's self care. It's like, okay, we have to have things that the president sees when
it's
he's sitting up there in the residence. We got to do this. It's sort of, it's again the warm bath of Donald Trump's safe space. I love the quote from Mike.
almost Tubin like, you might say.
Well, you know what, I was about to go there. It's like there's politics that is designed to actually accomplish something, and then there are things that are just designed to kind of pleasure yourself. And I think that maybe could we invent a word here that the Trump campaign tubined itself. So, but here's the quote from Mike Murphy, who's been around Republican circles forever. You know Mike Murphy.
I know
He said
Mike well.
they spent their money on unnecessary overhead, lifestyles of the rich and famous, activity by the campaign staff, and vanity ads. You could literally have 10 monkeys with flamethrowers go after the money, and they wouldn't have burned through it as stupidly.
Murphy's still the quickest wit in politics, isn't he?
That that is yeah, that is the case. The other stuff seems, the other stories, the fact that the president is replaying his greatest hits from Ukraine and the Hunter Biden thing, and the way the conservative media is sort of lapping it up. But that just has the whole flop sweat feel about it.
I know, and your senator there in Wisconsin, Ron Johnson, grabbing onto it is it does absolutely feel that way. I don't know who really outside of the red hats are going to find fault with Joe Biden for loving his son, no matter how much trouble or how much hurt the kid is in or the man is in. It was just, and I thought Ron Johnson's that was one of the most offensive, despicable things I've heard a member of the Senate say in a long time. And boy, there's been a lot of crap coming out of that place lately, but that was something.
Just pound on my head here. It's just I'm this is my home state senator, and of course I've
Yeah.
known Ron John
Yeah.
for a long time. But that moment where he's on national television throwing out the child porn allegation, I mean,
I just,
there. Look, I mean, I know there are no longer any lines in politics, but it's interesting that outside of that moment, nobody's even bringing this up. And this is the seat. I have to actually do the math on this. I'm pretty sure I'm right about this. I'll be really embarrassed if I'm wrong about this, but he's holding the seat held by Joe McCarthy.
yeah,
I
I
mean,
would.
so
Well, it was certainly an indecent thing. No doubt about that.
well, I
I,
mean, Joe McCarthy was ultimately censured by the United States Senate, and that was really the end of his career. And it's one thing to be because we keep lowering our standards and redefining deviancy. So it's one thing to be a rabid partisan. Not that I'm pro that, but when you are throwing out stuff that sounds like it came out of a QAnon, Facebook post about child pornography, I mean, that
right.
is just I Mark, I gotta tell you, I mean, I'm sure you've had this experience. People ask me, "What happened? What happened to him?"
I,
And my answer is, "I don't freaking know."
I,
I
I, I mean, he's a conduit for Russian disinformation. I guess it's sort of on the policy side of McCarthyism. He seems to be taking an odd approach, but I mean, that's just what Trump's done to the party, though. What Trump's done to he's either cast them all into some sort of silent paralysis. I'm talking about Republicans, or it's become, it's become an environment, a political environment in the Republican Party where Joe McCarthy would never be censured. You
That's
know
true.
that
Yeah.
that it would never happen. Why? It doesn't matter if something's true or not. If a lie works better than the truth, then the lie is preferable. There's no moral quality to it. It's appalling. They've lost senses of honor. There's nothing left. I don't know how some people look themselves in the mirror some mornings, but it's something like that. Where you
No,
take a guy who's obviously got a son who's got some problems. A man who has lost more than most of us have lost in his life in terms of loved ones. And say something like that. I mean, just good God, man, you can't even have any self-respect to do that, not much less, a sense of decency to others.
and that's not going to change after Donald Trump leaves. I mean, that's the damage which is continuing. This is going to feel like a digression, but it's a podcast, so you can do a digression. Uh, Ben Shapiro is rationalizing how he's gone from being a never Trumper to being all in for Trump, and he is totally all in. And one of his rationalizations is that, okay, so Donald Trump's a man of lousy character. He wasn't wrong about his character. He was wrong about his that he turned out to be a real conservative, whatever that means. But he wasn't wrong about the man having a deficient character. But then he goes on to say that all of the damage that was done by his bad character has already been done. So you might as well just keep going with it, which is so incandescently stupid. I'm sorry, it is
Yeah,
just so it's so devoid of any sort of reality check, because a man of an awful character can not only do direct damage, he can do the kind of moral damage that you were just describing to the entire party by basically stripping out any sense of decency and honor from his supporters, from his allies, from his
right.
from the entire political culture.
Yeah. Shapiro's a poser, and he's a little bit of a grift. Trump turned out to be more of a conservative who's right now trying to bid up Nancy Pelosi on on the stimulus bill. Um, who's stabbed allies in the back, who's walked away from, sort of sucked up to our adversaries. I mean, it's, conservatives used to believe character matters. Conservatives used to believe character matters more than anything else.
I have here in my bookshelf sort of the detritus of my last 20 years, all of these books, including pretty much a full collection of the Bill Bennett books about honoring
Book of
character, and
virtues.
indeed the Book of Virtues, which just are
Which,
sort of
which,
like
which chapter would have Trump fit under? You'd wonder.
I, and of course he's all in. Okay, so speaking of character, because this is where your book, and you've obviously been giving a lot of thought to this, how we went from an era that looked at somebody like a John McCain and said, this is a hero, this is a man, you can disagree with him, but this is somebody who is to be admired, to having a political party headed by somebody who is the absolute antithesis of John McCain. And my theory all along has been that Donald Trump could never deal with the reality of the idea of John McCain, because he understands that John McCain was the kind of man that he could never be.
Right. I mean, that's they've had issues going way back. I reported about something in the mid '90s, with Trump tried to get something out of him for making a campaign donation. But I don't know. I'm not sure how we got here, Charlie. I guess at some point elections became no longer a means to an end. They just became the end, and it didn't matter, what you did to hold on to office. Everything was fair game. And I doubt you could find 100 Republicans in Washington who would have thought, in the 2016 Republican convention, that it was a good idea to be nominating Donald Trump, or that he reflected any of their values, which of course he doesn't, But,
So
they all, well, judges, tax cuts, there you go. But if Trump thought there was something in it for him to take all those tax cuts away, he'd do it in a minute. He doesn't have a philosophical principle. He's just got insecurities. That's all. He's a black hole of narcissism, but there's nothing else that he is.
So tell me about this book, and how you went about writing it, The Luckiest Man Alive, which I strongly
Sure.
recommend. Fantastic reviews. You spent years with John McCain. So just
Did.
tell me about the process of, in this era, to write a biography of a man who is really sort of the ultimate contrarian in the era of Trump.
Yeah. So you're right. I worked for him for about 30 years, and we became good friends over the course of that. And he and I wrote books together, 7 of them, and it became sort of a habit that I would write about McCain every other year or so. And but I wanted to see if I could write about him. My publisher had wanted a biography, but one from my perspective. Now, I didn't know him when he was in the Navy, so I had to rely on the things he told me and the clues to how he felt about things that he gave me, stuff that he said, quite explicitly, and stuff that he just hinted at, to write about his relationship with his family and his early childhood and his time in the Navy and at Naval Academy and his prisoner of war experience. And I also had notes from hours and hours and hours of interviews that we did when we were writing his various memoirs.
So you know how his mind works.
Yeah,
You knew, because you spent so much time with him and you went through the thought process.
yeah.
So John McCain was never an ideologue. He was never one thing or another. So what's I'm going to ask this in a different way in a few
Sure.
minutes too. So what's the through line
Okay.
in John McCain's
Yeah.
philosophy or his approach to
Right.
politics?
Yeah, he didn't have so much of a political philosophy as he had a code of conduct. And that code of conduct was informed. He's a fascinating personality. He had real dualities to his nature. And one of them was he was a great romantic about the causes he was involved in. And the most important cause he was involved in, as he viewed it, in his public service to the United States, was to prove that self-government was the only moral government and that everybody's entitled to it. But that code of conduct, was informed by his experience. So even though he was a romantic about his causes, he was a great cynic about the world. And that's because in the same experience in Vietnam, he experienced the best and the worst of humanity. And I think it really informed that he never gave up hope, no matter how bleak the situation. That's why, resistance movements and dissidents in countries all over the world knew him, and admired him. And, Joe Lieberman will tell you a story once of McCain walking into a refugee camp, a Syrian refugee camp in southern Turkey, they'd Kofi Annan, the former UN Secretary General, had just been there, and they chased him out of the place, throwing their shoes at him and everything. And as McCain approached, the whole place started chanting "McCain, McCain,
Mm.
McCain." My daughter was a Peace Corps volunteer in Cambodia, and near the end of John's life, she was teaching in a remote village in Cambodia, and one of her Cambodian counterparts was sort of bemoaning their lack of freedom in Cambodia and an autocratic government, and said to her, "But we have friends in America who are trying to help us. John McCain is trying to help us." He had no idea my daughter had any connection to John McCain, but that's I don't think people appreciated just how revered around the world he was by people who were struggling and fighting for their freedom, and that all became that's the cause McCain served all his life, and believed that, if not absolved him, redeemed him from whatever flaws and failings he had in life. And he was quite aware of them. He knew he had a temper. He knew he could be impetuous. He knew he'd been, unnecessarily rebellious in institutions he had come to revere in later life, like the Naval Academy and Episcopal High School, and he borrowed from their codes of conduct, from the literature he read. He was one of the most well-read people I've ever known in my life, both literature and non-literature. He had an endless, restless curiosity about the world, which he got from his mother, who just passed away last week at the age of 108. And then he was raised, by his father and grandfather, to, in sort of the ethos of an officer doesn't lie, cheat, or steal. Those things matter to him to the end of his day. He once told me he had not a completely easy relationship with his father, but he admired his father, and said to me once, when we were working, like his father, he was asked once to give the commencement address at the Naval Academy. I said, what would you say about your father? And he goes, well, they're meaning his father and grandfather, who were both 4-star admirals.
Hmm.
Their respect for me has been the most lasting ambition of my life.
Yeah, no pressure there.
Yeah. So it's
interesting that you describe that duality, that you're a romantic and a cynic, and they're not contradictory.
No, and it's just I wrote this line. I'm happy with it, so I quote myself all the time on it. But he thought the most marvelous of human achievements was to not lose hope when experience had taught you hope is for fools, and he managed to do it. And it's. We were talking in the last book I did with him, which was finished in the year he was dying. He wanted to write a lot about, the sort of human rights movements he associated with. He was very influenced by Scoop Jackson, who he knew very well and traveled with, and by stories from Natan Sharansky about how Reagan inspired them when they were all in the Gulag. But he wanted to write about, what appeared to some people as the hopelessness of some of these causes. And he mentioned Belarus, and he talked about meeting the same dissidents year after year. They wouldn't let him into Minsk, so he had to meet him in Latvia or Lithuania or one of the Baltics. And he said, boy, it'd be the same faces, and they'd be at it every year, and they'd never get anywhere with them, but God, they never quit. It was just so damn admirable, it's just, because they, sort of sorry, sad sack, but they at it and at it and at it. He admired those types of people more than any other. And here we are now, 2 years after his passing, when those same people are now seeing that, their movement come to, some kind of, fruition here in these massive protests in that country. And, it's, there's something to it. He taught me the thing McCain taught me more than any others. Cause I'm, I have a dark sensibility too. I just don't have the, I find, it's dark enough where I'm not as hopeful as he was, but he taught me that hope makes all good things possible in this world, and you got to hold on to it.
Well, he also had that sensibility that we were. This isn't his phrase, but I mean, it was Reagan said, the shining city on the hill. That he understood that the way
Right.
you're describing it, the importance of the American example, the American leadership that
Right.
provided that hope,
Yeah.
and to watch that be squandered, and I think that's there's a fundamental difference in patriotism. You have a president now who wraps himself in the flag and talks about America first, but really does not believe in the American exceptionalism that John McCain really believed in.
He doesn't know what it is.
Right.
I mean, I pay $1,000 to hear Trump define American exceptionalism. You know, I, what?
Yeah, well, it's all transactional
Yeah,
because we
right.
are bigger. So, let's talk about and talk about through lines in somebody's life because people are flawed. People make mistakes. People will take the wrong path, and as I get older, I think about the real blessing of having a long life to be able to correct some of the things that you might have done earlier in life. That
Hmm.
the John McCain in his 80s was very different than the John McCain in his 40s
Yes.
and his 50s,
Yep.
and look back on this, and I think you described this. So I mean, there are some defining moments in someone's life. For me, when I think about, you know, the defining moments for John McCain's life is when he was offered the opportunity to leave the Vietnamese prisoner of war camp because he was an admiral's son, and he turned
Hmm.
it down.
Hmm.
That really, to me, that that covers a multitude of sins for the
Yeah.
rest of his life.
Yeah. And I think he saw it as it was a great test of his character and judgment, and it always gave him confidence even when he screwed up that he wasn't going to chronically screw up, that when the big test came he would do the right thing. And he sort of had this point of view, as I mentioned before, that as long as you can screw up, you know but you can, if you show courage and sacrifice and service
Yeah.
to others, you redeem those mistakes. And that's why he called himself the luckiest man. It's obviously a reference to, he had a lot of, not just in prison, but he crashed a few airplanes. He was his
Hmm.
the terrible fire on the USS Forrestal. That was his aircraft carrier, and it started when a missile fired across the flight deck and hit the fuel tank on his airplane while he was in the plane. He survived that. He survived several plane crashes. He survived a rather serious bout of melanoma. But it was really, more than anything, it meant he felt he was lucky to have survived his own flaws, and and been a happy person, a satisfied person at the end of his life. And he would repeat it over and over again, right until the very end. And I mean, within weeks of his death, I'm the luckiest person you'll ever meet. And that's what he meant by it. And it's just, you're right. When you say he couldn't be more opposite Trump. They're as if they're a different species. I mean, it's
It,
just
it it does
something.
feel like they're different speed. Well, let's talk about some of the low points though that you talk about in the book. I mean, leaving aside the war, the Keating Five scandal could have been career ending for
Yeah,
John McCain.
yeah.
It's lost now in the distant mists of time, but just talk about how that shaped him and changed him, because the John McCain who was Mr. Campaign Finance Reform was obviously shaped by his own near-death political experience
Yeah,
there. Am I
yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, it had an impact on how he comported himself and his sort of style of politics. He was always a pretty candid, forthright guy. There wasn't a big difference between the private and the public. John McCain, his mother used to say he has no sides. He's all he is all the time. But it did show him, like, I think in the beginning he lost his temper with a couple of local Arizona reporters, and that did not redound to his benefit. And then shortly after that, he started giving these exhaustive press conferences in which he'd answer every question on the subject. And he realized that the truth of the story was helpful to him, not a hindrance, or didn't expose him. So that was a style he sort of kept up. He was inclined that way anyway, but that sort of confirmed him in that. that mindset. He realized that how important appearances were in politics, because there was a special counsel appointed, Bob Bennett, and there was an
Hmm.
exhaustive investigation and public hearings, which were torture for him. He felt humiliated by them. But there were five senators. This is going to test the memories of even people like us, Charlie, and the
Hmm.
people people born after the invention of color television probably won't know what we're talking about. But the special investigator had recommended that McCain and John Glenn, who was one of the other five,
Hmm.
be released, that they hadn't done anything seriously wrong, and the other three merited further investigation. But politics being politics, McCain was the only Republican. George Mitchell was majority leader at the time. He couldn't spring McCain free, which meant he couldn't spring John Glenn. I always thought, it's one thing to
Oh
hold the
man.
Republican, but to hold the Democrat to keep the Republican held, that's pretty cold. But so that frustrated and made him angry and everything. But he realized that he had done something. There was an appearance problem there that he was responsible for, and he wasn't gonna. And the other thing it taught him is, and I tell this story, I had just started working for him really not long before all this began, and I was his foreign policy aide to begin with, and we were walking back from the Senate floor outside on a nice day, and to the Russell Senate office building. He had been debating something, some Central American issue, and he was very quiet and very withdrawn, which is not typical for him. And we're walking back, and he didn't say a word on the whole walk back until we got to the stairs that lead to the first floor of the Russell building. And he just looked at me, and we hadn't been talking about anything, so it was apropos of nothing, but just said, "It's not always going to be like this." And
Hmm.
that was my first good glimpse at the sort of unusual, outsized, way above average John McCain resilience factor. That he could take a pounding and keep going like nobody had ever seen in this business. So it's and I guess that
Well,
too,
yeah.
he proved in Vietnam.
Well, let's talk about the 2008 campaign. How did he regret choosing Sarah Palin in
And the
that
way he put
campaign?
it, he regretted not choosing Joe Lieberman.
Hmm.
He felt personally responsible to her, Sarah Palin, and to the country, I guess, for putting her on the ticket. So he's never said a harsh word about her. Unfortunately, I think he said what I just said, that he wished that he'd picked Lieberman in his last book, and he wanted me to make sure that was in there. And I heard she took offense at that, but he wasn't criticizing her. He was saying his instinct was to pick Lieberman. He wanted to do it. Guys like me, his aides, talked him out of it because we were told quite correctly that it would have caused quite a furor at the convention, and there would have been a challenge on the floor, and we could probably win it, but we would limp out of the Twin Cities, with an unhappy, big chunk of unhappy Republicans. Um, so we prevailed on him not to do it, and
Well, you also remember how unhappy some Republicans were in that campaign, and I think of defining moments, and and again, I'm certainly not unique in this respect. That moment where a woman is asking him about Barack Obama being a Muslim and
right,
everything, and he goes, no, 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 and he takes the microphone away from her, and he doesn't go there, and there were people who were like, oh, see, this is it. He doesn't have that killer instinct, and
yeah,
that a lot of the Trump world ethos is sort of built around saying we can't be decent like that. That we look back on that as one of the great moments of American political civility, where he didn't go there.
yeah,
But there were a lot of Republicans that drew from that. No, you need to be a killer instinct. You need to throw everything at them. You need to imply that people have child porn on their blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. So you want to talk about the defining moment for John McCain, but also how really politics has, Republican politics has decided that no, they want to go in a completely different direction.
yeah. I guess he would have been ashamed of himself if he had just nodded and gone along with it, or even if he just sort of brushed it off. He would have been ashamed of himself, and there was nothing he feared more than being ashamed of himself. It was a core thing with him. I don't I don't know how people can do something like that and not be ashamed of themselves. That's when it goes back to Ron Johnson. I mean, I just don't. I don't know, Charlie. I mean, it's. I don't know why
I don't
people.
know. I don't know. I don't know either. And you spent the final years with John McCain, who clearly was thinking about his life.
Yeah.
There's that famous Viktor Frankl book, about the meaning of life, where he says,
Yeah. Man,
where
search
you
for me.
define the
Yeah.
meaning of your life, you imagine yourself, being, in your 80s or your 90s on your deathbed, and you look back on your life and you think, what was the meaning of my life, and what were the specific decisions that shaped the meaning of your life? That seems like the kind of thing that John McCain went through. And I
Yeah.
am struck by the number of people in American public life that don't seem to have that sense at all. They don't sit back and go, okay, yes, I may get a win here in this news cycle or in this political cycle, but when I look back on my life, am I going to be proud of this, or am I going to be ashamed of this?
Right. Yeah, Man's Search for Meaning, boy, written by a former concentration camp prisoner. But when I read that the first time McCain had read it, obviously, I said, "My God, this was written for McCain." It's the way he dealt with everything.
It was the
Um,
way he dealt with everything,
yeah,
because he didn't want to put it into a narrative. So
no,
why did he, since we're on this subject, why did he do the thumbs down and vote to
sure,
deliver Donald Trump probably one of his greatest legislative defeats on that skinny health care bill?
yeah. I mean, obviously it was influenced by the fact that he'd just been diagnosed and with brain cancer and just had an operation to remove a tumor from his frontal lobe. But it actually started in advance of that. Curiously, he had gone home to Arizona, uh, and and before he had left a couple of weeks before that, he said he called me because I still, I left the Senate in 2000 for the 2008 campaign, but I stayed employed on his committees, the reelection committee, PACs for
Mhm.
years afterwards. And he said, "I want to give a speech when we come back on regular order." He was fed up with what he viewed as he and McConnell got along better than people think they did, but with the leadership on both sides aggregating more and more power to themselves and their staff at the expense of the committees. He was a committee chairman, and he sort of came of age in the Senate, aspiring to be the Armed Service Committee chairman someday, and because he had admired many of his predecessors, but he wanted to give the speech where says, what he viewed committees as the Senate was the last institution left where compromise was sort of necessary. And that usually occurred in committees where you got to know the members, your fellow members of the committees you were assigned to better than you knew other members, and you made deals with them all the time in committee, and that led to what McCain thought they should pride themselves on, that you don't get 100% of your way, but if you make a little every year, you make a modest progress on the problems, your country's problems. That's an honorable achievement, and that's the best that our system is set up to produce. So let's do it. So he wanted to get back to what he called regular order, where an alternative to Obamacare would go to the Health Committee, and Democrats and Republicans would work out some kind of fix to Obamacare, or an alternative to Obamacare, or at least try to, and not just have leadership staff write it and just whip the votes on both sides and get the usual product. He thought that major pieces of legislation needed buy-in from both parties, or they would always be just sort of transitory, and which is exactly what's happening now. And he had campaigned, like other Republicans had campaigned, on repealing Obamacare, but it was always repeal and replace. And the motion or the bill that he was going to vote for and voted against just repealed major portions of Obamacare and didn't replace it with anything. So on top of that, then you lay over, he had just been diagnosed with a terminal disease. He knew it was a bad diagnosis. He wasn't fooled into deluding himself into thinking he was going to survive this, but he also knew that he would have literally the best medical care he could, anybody could possibly attain, and a lot of people wouldn't have any decent medical care because they didn't have the money or insurance for it, So that put him in a moral quandary as well. And for all those reasons, for the process part of it, but also for that moral quandary is why he gave the famous thumbs down. Now, it was a dramatic moment. I was at home and I'd fallen asleep on my couch, so I missed it live. But
No, no, I
um,
was asleep too. I went to
um,
sleep thinking it was going to pass, and then you wake up in the morning. It's like, oh my gosh.
yeah, but I mean, they've people have diagrammed. Somebody said some diagram that scene where the Senate's watching him as he shoots the thumbs down as if it was a Renaissance painting. But he was the last person to vote because he kept being pulled out into the hallway to be lobbied by Republicans, including Pence, who put him on the phone with Trump, and that he had just finished talking to Trump when he walked on the floor. Otherwise, he would have voted earlier. He wasn't deliberately waiting for the thumbs down thing. He had because of his war injuries, he broke both arms and one leg when he ejected from his airplane in Hanoi. But he had very difficult time raising his arms other than shoulder level. So that's how whenever he did a thumbs up or down, it went straight out in front of him. You see him at ball games give him thumbs up like that. That's a typical thing to do, to gesture, some physical gesture in the well, because typically it's crowded with people all voting at the same time, and the clerks can't hear yay or nay. So you give them a thumbs up or a thumbs down or a finger up or a finger down or something like that. So it really was just, it took on all that drama because of the circumstance, obviously, but it wasn't as staged as I think some people think it was.
No, and I remember the speech that he gave about the regular order, which may sound again wonky, but really, I think one of the stories of the last few years has been the sort of the institutional self-immolation of the United States Senate that
Yeah.
has really become. Was willing to surrender its dignity and its powers again and again and again.
And both sides,
He was
both
bothered
Democrats
by
and
that.
Republicans have done it. Yeah, it's
So, what? This is the obvious question. Had he lived, what do you think he would be doing in this campaign right now?
well, he didn't vote for Donald Trump last time, and as I've said,
Right.
oftentimes Trump doesn't improve on longer acquaintance. So my assumption is he'd be voting
Right.
for his longtime friend Joe Biden, but certainly his widow is, and I think she's probably not doing it simply because she assumes John would want her to, but she's got her, she's made her own judgment here. But I think
It's a dramatic story. Maybe we take it for granted, but when you think about what's happened to the Arizona Republican Party and what the Arizona Republican Party once represented and what it has become now, it is a remarkable moment.
it's
And I think it's embodied by some of the things that Cindy McCain has said and some of the ads that she's running there.
yeah, it's a glimpse at the future for the Republican Party. Any party that succeeds, the more people it discourages from voting, is not a party with a long future. And Arizona, a bedrock red state for years and years and years, is it's purple and it's trending blue. And Maricopa County, which is where all the Republican votes were that would overwhelm the more Democratic South, Tucson and Pima County. It's as David Axelrod calls it, one big suburb, and it's sprawling. Its growth has been tremendous over the years, and a lot of migration in from other states. We're gonna. I mean, the way the Republican Party politicking, if it continues like this, sort of exploiting nativism and phony populism and that kind of stuff, it's just going to dry up and go away. There'll be a point where a Republican candidate for president can't win Texas, which means there'll never be a Republican president again. And
So I think that's exactly right. And you are seeing the future in Arizona where the Republican Party has become crazier and crazier. I mean, we're at the point now where a Jeff Flake or a John McCain probably could not win a Republican primary any longer. But the people who win the Republican primary may be incapable of winning a general election.
well, they are, and I think Flake would have had a problem. McCain had such independents can vote in the Republican primary there, and McCain had he always had a problem with a quarter or a third of the party. Going back to the Ev Meekum days, he had called on Ev Meekum, the old crazy Republican governor,
Oh, yeah.
and to resign, and He's long had that problem, but he always more than made up for it with crossover votes from Democrats and independents, which I mean he handily dispatched serious Republican challenger in the primaries in his last two primaries, and then would win huge. He faced a very credible Democratic candidate his last reelection. A sitting member of Congress, and he won by 14 points when Donald Trump won by a little over 3.
Yeah. So, congratulations on the book, because
Thank
I'm
you.
I'm looking at how you're doing on Amazon.com. Number 2 in bestsellers for Congress. Number 5 in World War II biographies, which is really something. And the Washington Post said that Mark Salter's psychological portrait of McCain is informed and convincing. McCain may have considered himself the luckiest man on earth, but we too are lucky to have counted him among our leaders and to have this intimate biography that will keep his memory bright. Mark Salter, thank you so much for spending time with us today on the podcast.
Thank you, Charlie. I appreciate it.
And thank you all for listening to today's Bulwark podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. We'll be back tomorrow, and we will do this all over again. There are just 13 days to go before Election Day.